Good afternoon, dear students, alumni and guests. My name is Professor Grażyna Rębielak, and on behalf of the Warsaw University of Technology Business School, I would like to welcome you very warmly to today's inspirational lecture. I want to welcome all our students and alumni, not only from our university, Warsaw University of Technology, but also all the guests from our partner institutions. So first of all, Polimi Graduate School of Management Politecnico di Milano, the University of Salford in Manchester, Goa Management Institute in India, Baltic Management Institute in Vilnius and Brussels, HEC in Paris, the Management Center in Innsbruck, and Zicklin School of Business Baruch College in New York City University. Today, the inspirational lecture will be delivered by Camilla Sorrentino, who is representing Polimi Graduate School of Management Politecnico di Milano. Camilla is researcher and specialist in AI systems. Her research mainly focuses on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence and in particular on how to assess and operationalize the concept of fairness in organizations using AI systems. The topic she is delivering tonight is navigating artificial intelligence ethics from implications to mitigation strategies. I would like to also take this opportunity to invite you to the next inspirational lecture, which will be delivered on 20th of June by Mr. Andrzej Mierzwa, who is representing our school, and who will be talking about the human factor within a financial sector. So you will get a separate invitation for this event shortly. Camilla will start her presentation in a moment. After she finishes, you will have an opportunity to ask her questions on the chat. So I would like to wish you a good time and enjoy the lecture. Camilla, you are more than welcome to start your lecture. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. So today we will be talking about artificial intelligence ethical implications, especially for organizations that are implementing these systems into their operations. And specifically, we will be looking at the concept of fairness and how fairness can be translated into AI systems workings. So first of all, let me start by introducing why we should care about algorithmic fairness and more in general about fairness of AI systems. So first of all, I am presenting you with a framework that the European Union has developed in 2019 when it started to publish works on the ethical implications of artificial intelligence. Of course, considering the ever widespread use of the technology within organizations, within institutions, and especially also among citizens, the European Union has actually set up specific technical and scientific committees to oversee whether the development of artificial intelligence can be a risk to society, to citizens' rights. And so it has consequently developed a framework according to which AI can be implemented in what it's called a trustworthy way. So what we're seeing here are the main values that the European Union actually introduces for a trustworthy AI system. So for an artificial intelligence system to be actually considered trustworthy and so not risky for the citizens, not risky for the rights that the European Union shares and the values that the European Union and the countries that are part of it share altogether. So as you can see here, the values go from accountability of AI systems, and this is especially related to the fact that somebody has to be accountable for the decisions that are being made by an automated system, and specifically also in terms of laws and regulation, accountability has to be defined for AI systems. Another principle that is cited within the regulation is, for example, that of societal and environmental well-being. And here, what the European Union has in mind is the fact that AI systems that are being now developed by organizations and implemented should be aimed at societal and environmental well-being. So in general, they should be aimed at pursuing wider objectives of sustainability altogether, social and environmental sustainability. Another principle is that of transparency. So, as you may know, sometimes AI systems are referred to as black box systems. So basically, systems into which it is hard to see the workings, and it is hard to understand why the algorithms actually get to the final output that we as users then see and receive. So transparency deals with the idea that AI systems should work in a transparent way, and especially in a way that is communicable to the users, so that everyone can be aware of why the AI systems has made a given decision. As you can see, there are other values that the European Union states in its framework, like, for example, that of human agency and oversight, which is mandatory throughout the life cycle of an artificial intelligence system, that of technical robustness and safety, so to protect basically the AI systems that organizations develop and implement from, for example, malicious attacks by hackers. And then the privacy and data governance principle, which has already been expressed not only in the guidelines for trustworthy AI, but also in other European Union's regulations that deal with how data, and especially personal and sensitive data, is being treated within organizations. Now let's get to the final principle, which is also the focus of today's session, which is that of diversity, non-discrimination, and fairness. So how is it defined by the high-level expert group on AI, which has been set up by the European Union? Well, this would be the avoidance of unfair bias, and it would be the need to grant everybody accessibility, universal design, and stakeholder participation into the development and implementation of AI systems. So most of it, it's a concept that deals with the fact that diversity has to be respected, and that non-discrimination principles, especially based on gender or ethnicity, or, for example, religious creed, should be at all costs avoided when we are implementing an AI system and we are effectively delegating to the AI system some sort of decision within a decision-making context. So why do we need to care? We need to care, first of all, because the European Union has been working for now a long time on the topic of regulating AI in such a way that it can actually be deemed as a trustworthy technology. And now it's not only a matter, let's say, of guidelines, so kind of soft policy instruments, but it actually became a regulation. So through the AI Act, which has been approved on the 13th of March of this year. So the first draft dates back to 2021, and then finally now in 2024, also 2 days ago, the European Council has voted on the AI Act, which has finally been approved. So the AI Act is actually a regulation where basically all the systems that have AI components and AI functionalities have to respect the values that you see in this framework. So basically what the European regulator is now saying is that all the AI systems that are developed, implemented and marketed within the European common market have to adhere to specific principles which reflect the democratic values of the European Union. So the the act is actually binding for all organizations that are operating within the boundaries of the European Union, and it requires organizations to actually track how their AI system works throughout the life cycle of the system, especially to ensure that all these principles are respected. So now it's also going to be a matter not only of reputational risk of having possible issues with AI systems that may be unethical, but it's also a matter of compliance with a binding regulation. So algorithmic fairness and overall looking at trustworthy AI is something that we really need to care about if we look at this technology, because it's now effectively mandatory. So algorithmic fairness, what are the implications of not doing it? So we are talking here about unfairness, what has happened in the past, and why also with new regulations, the institutions like the EU are looking at how to regulate and ensure that fairness is maintained within an AI system. So here the example that I would like to discuss with you, which maybe some of you know because it's a very, let's say, celebrated example when we think about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence systems, is that of the Compass system. So the Compass system was system that has been marketed within the United States by the company Northpoint Inc. And basically, it served the purpose of predicting recidivism in people who had been arrested for either misdemeanors or for major offenses. So what has been the problem with the Compass system, which has made it famous worldwide? In 2016, a study by the Center ProPublica started to investigate whether the recidivism prediction that the Compass system was supposed to give out to the judicial system was effectively fair, both between white offenders and non-white, specifically Black offenders. Of course, as you may know, the United States is a country that has suffered from racial discrimination, racial bias, and historically it has a division between treatment that may happen to white segment of the population and the Black segment of the population. So here the aim of the study for ProPublica was to see whether the algorithmic system that was offered by Compass, which was used to predict recidivism, was actually showing the same historical inequalities that have long afflicted US history. So what you see here is an example of one of the cases that ProPublica has analyzed and has actually published in its research, which looks at white offendants. So you can see the male in the picture on the left, Vernon Prater, who has been scored by the Compass algorithm as a low-risk subject. So as somebody who would not be so inclined to reoffend. In the other case, you can see the Black offendant, so Brisha Borden, who was scored instead a high-risk individual. So if we look at the information concerning the offenses, the prior offenses that these two subjects have on their record, we can see that in the case of the white male who has been scored as a low risk by the Compass algorithm, we actually have major offenses on the record. So we have 2 armed robberies and 1 attempted armed robbery. And also we can see that after it did recidivate, so with 1 grand theft. In the case of the Black defendant, so Brisha Borden, we can see that she had as prior offenses 4 juvenile misdemeanors. So actually offenses that were not as risky or as indicative of a probability of recidivism as in the case of the white male Vernon. However, the Compass system still gave a risk score, which you can see is very different between the two defendants. So where one, which if we look at the record was scored a low risk, should have been scored as a high risk defendant, and in the other case, the one who should have been scored as a low risk has been scored as a high risk defendant. And this happened not only in the case of Vernon and Brescia, but it happened in a statistically significant way. So there was a systematic error in the way that the Compass system actually evaluated the recidivism rate, so the recidivism risk of the defendants when the population was divided into black defendants and white defendants. So this was probably one of the first and most famous cases to do some whistleblowing within society concerning the risks that algorithmic decision-making can have for the welfare of especially minority segments in the population, like that of African Americans in the United States. And of course, it really raised the pressure for institutions on the appropriate regulations that should be effectively put into place to avoid any further happenings of this kind. So what are now the institutions doing? We saw that the European Union is particularly active in this segment. We now have an historical, actually, regulation with the AI Act. Is the first one worldwide that has as an objective to regulate artificial intelligence systems based on the risk that they may pose to the welfare of society. However, there are also some instruments and initiatives that are emerging on an international level that can provide, especially practitioners who use these systems, develop these systems, and actually market them to other companies, which may help face the challenges that AI decision-making can bring in terms of ethics and respect for the values that we saw were in the European Union framework. So in this case, you can see that, for example, the OECD itself, through an AI policy observatory, is working on collecting a catalog of tools and metrics to determine whether a system is actually trustworthy, also in compliance with the definition that the European Union is giving of trustworthy AI systems. So there is for sure a lot of interest concerning the topic of studying the ethical implications of AI, and especially there is now also a lot of interest concerning what may be the tools and the techniques that companies can use to actually make sure that the systems that they develop and market are trustworthy, so that happenings like that of Compass, which is just one example out of many, may not happen again. So how has algorithmic fairness specifically been up to now studied, and what are the main point of views on the topic? So if we take the academic perspective, algorithmic fairness has mainly been studied within three different academic fields and three different scientific communities. So first of all, the topic of fairness, especially in AI decision-making, has been studied by the philosophy scientific community, where there is a greater focus on the conceptual and normative aspects of fairness. So where there is actually an exploration of what are the ethical principles and values that should guide algorithmic decision-making. Then we have the legal perspective, which instead has seen legal scholars examining the implications of algorithmic bias and discrimination with respect to the existing anti-discrimination laws, and also thinking about what could be future frameworks, new legal frameworks to address this issue. And of course, the European Union's AI Act is an example of a new legal framework that uses a risk-based approach to actually evaluate whether an AI system poses an important risk to society, depending on its objective, the use of data, and the context in which it is to be deployed. Third of all, there is the more, let's say, technical perspective. So the perspective of the machine learning scholars. Here, the attention has mostly focused on developing algorithmic techniques and methodologies that address fairness concerns in how the algorithm works. So, for example, you might see techniques of bias mitigation in the dataset to make sure that the data that the artificial intelligence system uses is, for example, representative of the population. It's not over discriminating what could be minority segments. And for example, there are also other techniques like, for example, fairness-aware algorithms, which introduce within the computation model itself some form of constraint that represents an ideal of fairness and non-discrimination. So for today, we will particularly look at the machine learning perspective, so at how algorithmic fairness has been studied within this scientific community. First of all, because it is probably the field that has more implications for how organizations can actually start deploying fairness within their systems, and especially because it is the field where the topic of algorithmic fairness has been most studied in terms of definition and assessment of fairness of AI systems. So if we look at how fairness has been treated within the machine learning community, well, it has mostly been studied in what are called machine learning classification tasks. So if you think, for example, about the Compass case that we saw before, that would be a classification task where a machine learning algorithm is basically tasked with the objective to classify whether a defendant would be a recidivist in the future, or whether he or she would actually go on and not commit any further crimes. So this would be an example of a classification task, and it is one of the cases where fairness has been mostly studied in the literature. Of course, since we are in the machine learning community, how fairness is being studied is mostly in terms of a mathematical formulation of the concept. So how can we mathematically represent and evaluate fairness when we look at the decision of an AI system? Third point is the fact that fairness has mostly been studied in terms of discrimination. So many of the algorithmic techniques that the machine learning community introduces in order to assess whether an algorithm discriminates or not is basically based on the fact that a population is divided into two different groups. One group, which is called the majority group, which would be the one that has an advantage. So, for example, in the Compass case, think about the group of the white defendants. And then there would be another group, which is that of the minority segment of the population. So in the case of the Compass algorithm, that would be Afro-American defendant. So usually when we look at fairness in the machine learning community, we are thinking of discrimination among the population based on a single sensitive attribute. So for example, in the Compass case, that would be ethnicity, but we may choose any sensitive attribute based on which we would like to test for fairness. So, for example, it could also be based on gender. And of course, the objective of all the techniques that have been thought and employed by the machine learning community are based on the idea of wanting to avoid discriminatory outcomes for the disadvantaged group, being the minority group, which has suffered from historical inequality and biases. So let's try to see now how is fairness defined in the machine learning community. So we said that it's usually defined according to a mathematical formulation of the concept, and that it usually employs a division of the population among a sensitive group, a minority group, and a majority group. So let's think about the example of a classification algorithm, which could be employed by banks to score the creditworthiness of consumers. And this score that has been predicted, so this credit score that has been predicted by the algorithm, will be subsequently used to grant a loan. So granting a loan, of course, is something that determines financial access for people that are dealing with banks. So it's something where, of course, both the bank and the institution want to make sure that the decision-making process is fair and it's not discriminating based on sensitive attributes. And let's consider the case of credit scoring to grant a loan, where the sensitive attribute that we want to look at is gender. So we are assuming that we want to look at whether the algorithm is fairly dealing with males that are requesting a loan and females that are requesting a loan. So if we take this perspective, the academic literature divides fairness into two different groups. So the first group is the definition that falls within the category of group fairness. And here, what we mean is that the outcomes of the algorithmic decisions should be, on average, similar across the two groups that we have defined, so the majority and the minority group. And then we will see some examples of what it means for outcomes to be, on average, similar across groups. And then we have another type of fairness, which is called individual fairness. And here, the main idea is that the outcomes of algorithmic decisions should be similar between individuals who are similar. So we're not comparing groups, but we are comparing individuals. And these two are the main definitions of fairness that are used in the machine learning community to actually assess and evaluate whether an AI system is being discriminatory towards a minority group. So let's try to look at an example of group fairness to understand what it would mean to use such a measure. So again, think of having a credit scoring algorithm that is tasked with the objective of deciding whether to grant a positive score to an individual, where a positive score, of course, allows the individual to access the loan that he or she has requested. So if we want to test whether an AI credit score system that defines the credit score of a specific individual is being fair, what we may want to see is whether there is an equal probability for male individuals and female individuals to have a good predicted credit score. So there is a credit score that would grant them access to the loan. So if we find that there is equal probability for both male and female applicants to have a good predicted credit score, then we would be respecting the idea of demographic parity. So this is based on the premise that all groups, both the minority and the majority group, have an equal claim to positive outcomes. So females should be as likely as males to actually be predicted a good score to access a loan. So what are the implications of using, for example, such a measure? Well, on the bright side, it's an easy definition to work with. So once we see the results of a classification algorithm which divides our population of people requesting a loan into good creditors and bad creditors, it is easy to verify whether they are distributed evenly among the male population and the female population. And secondly, I think that you may see that it is in some way fair because, of course, we are having an assumption of equality. So there is an equal probability for male and females to actually have a good predicted score and so to access a loan. However, if we use this definition, which is the first definition that has been given in the algorithmic fairness scientific search, let's say, we may encounter some problems as well. So first of all, we do not know whether the assumption that resources should be allocated equally between males and females is something that should hold true, for example, in the financial sector when we think about loan granting. It might be the case that, for example, if we apply an assumption of equality, we may have an overselection of unqualified applicants, or we may use, for example, utility, so the performance in terms of the accuracy of the algorithm. So in using this definition, which we can see has some principles of fairness, of course, because there's an assumption of the need to distribute equally resources, it is not so straightforward to think that it is the best kind of definition to be used in, for example, the financial sector when we think about a loan. So we have other measures that we can use, and there are many measures. Here we are just looking at two examples. Another one is the equal opportunity measure. And here what we are asking the algorithm, in order to be fair, is for the probability of an applicant with an actual good credit score to be actually assigned to a good predicted credit score class, both whether it's a female or whether it's a male applicant. So, for example, if we think about the Compass case that we saw before, we saw that the Afro-American defendant had been classified incorrectly among those defendants who would go on to recidivate. Well, for example, this error should have been the same both whether we were thinking about the Afro-American group or the white defendants group. So what works better in this measure with respect to the previous one? Well, first of all, this is based on a definition of merit, because what we're asking is for people who actually deserve to be classified as good creditors, as good payers, to be classified as good payers by the algorithm itself. So it's something that is based on an idea of merit. So it addresses some of the concerns that we could see in the previous measure, which was mostly based on an assumption of equality. However, to estimate equal opportunity, there are some issues which concern especially the computation of the measure. So, for example, we need to know the true outcome, not only the score that the algorithm has given us. So if, for example, a female asks for a loan, then we would need also to observe whether the loan has been repaid by the female that we have predicted to be a good creditor. So there are some issues that deal mostly with difficulty also in the computation of this measure. Okay. Sorry, excuse me, I think I've had some issue with the connection. So after seeing just two examples of fairness measures that have been used in the machine learning community and that are usually taken as examples of how algorithms can be made more fair, we need to wonder whether we see some issues. So we saw that, for example, each measure has advantages and disadvantages. But mostly, if we look at all the measures that have been proposed in the literature, well, there is a vast amount of these statistical criteria which actually try to define what is fairness and actually try to assess it and evaluate it. However, we are not capable of using all the different fairness measures, and we are not capable of satisfying all the statistical requirements simultaneously. So this means that when we think about fairness of an AI algorithm, we need also to think about what is the most appropriate measure. So if, for example, we want to give everybody an equal opportunity, like the case for male and female in granting a loan, or, for example, if we want to have equal outcomes across groups, like, for example, having the same percentage of males and females receiving a good credit score and so actually being granted a loan. Secondly, this means that not only we need to choose a statistical criteria which is most suited to our needs, but we also need to choose a definition of fairness. So do we choose a definition of fairness which is based on equality? Do we choose a definition of fairness which is based on merit? Well, this is something that it's probably not going to be the same decision across all social contexts and all social decision-making contexts that we might encounter. So we have statistical measures, we have started to study the subject. However, what we are missing is the link between a statistical measure of fairness and a social perspective that actually helps us in defining what is fairness in a specific decision-making context. How can we do this? Well, the literature has provided many avenues for research to actually try and integrate the more technical perspective on algorithmic fairness, which is now very much developed with what could be a more social understanding of the concept. The first one is the socio-technical system perspective, which I will go back to in just a few minutes. The second one is a behavioral economics perspective. So this means to actually take into account that an algorithm does not exist by itself in a void, but it's something that interacts with human being, and also to be able to study the interaction with human beings of technological artifacts, so of AI algorithms. It's something that might give us information on how to make a system fair. So it's not only a matter of statistical computation of indicators, but it's also a matter of understanding, for example, the implications of machine and human interaction. A third perspective, which could be the empirical economics perspective. So in the literature, a lot of the fairness in machine learning systems has been studied, for example, in the US setting. The US setting, it's very different, for example, from what we might observe in Europe in terms of historical inequalities, in terms of social context, in terms of how the population is distributed. So it's important for scholars not only to study what is the case of fairness in artificial intelligence systems within, for example, the US setting, but also to enlarge their scope to understand what might be different in also a geographical context that does not suffer from the same historical inequalities. Last perspective is the distributive justice perspective, and this refers to this idea of incorporating distributive justice theories within the methodologies, the computational methodologies of artificial intelligence algorithms, so that they may be more fair in terms of allocation decisions. However, what I would like to talk about with you is the socio-technical system perspective, which is now being more and more studied by scholars, because it's a perspective that really helps to understand how organizations can deal with the issue of algorithmic fairness, not only from a technical perspective, so not only by choosing a statistical measure and trying to see whether the AI algorithm gives out fair and non-discriminatory results in that sense. But it's a perspective that helps to understand how the social context, so humans developing algorithms, humans using algorithm, deals with what is the technological component, so how it interacts with the artificial intelligence system. So adopting a socio-technical system perspective actually allows to study the issue of algorithmic fairness through a human-centric approach. So really through looking at how the interaction between human and AI in all the phases of an AI system development may be an issue for fairness, or how it may be, for example, a solution for introducing more fairness within artificial intelligence systems. So here I wanted just to sum up the idea of what a human-centric approach in algorithmic fairness looks like through this framework. So this framework describes a typical automated decision-making framework with an artificial intelligence system. So starting from problem setting, so the idea of an organization deciding to introduce an AI system within its operations and defining the objectives of the system. The phase of the data collection and the data analysis, which are required for the AI system to work. The phase of the model formulation, where actually artificial intelligence is being thought of computational methodologies that help deliver the final objective of the system. And then the decision phase, where the algorithm actually enters into its operation phase and starts especially interaction with human decision makers. So if we look at artificial intelligence not only as a model where we need to evaluate whether the outcome of that model is fair or not, but if we look at it as a process that starts from the objective that the company wants to reach through the AI system and goes up to the decision that is being made from artificial intelligence, and also, of course, with probably some human decision maker, then we may be able to understand how fairness is actually being an object of interest in all the different phases. So, for example, if we think about the problem formulation, so the idea of an organization wanting to introduce an artificial intelligence system within its operations, if we want to make sure that our system is fair, the first thing we should do is to understand what is fair for our company. And this is something that may be decided depending on the regulations that are, for example, present. So we have an EU regulation that is saying that algorithms have to be non-discriminatory. But then the organization has to understand in its specific decision-making context, what does it mean? So if we think about the example of credit scoring, a bank introducing a credit scoring algorithm to decide whether to grant a loan to individuals or not, then a bank may ask, what is fair for our bank? What do we think should be, for example, our idea of fairness when we want to grant a loan? And how should we balance the objective of being fair with the objective, of course, of being profitable? Because in the end, organizations are profit-making actors. Or if we think about fairness in the data phase, here we might think of wondering, for example, whether we have enough representative data of the population to train the algorithm. We may think at whether the data that we are using, although they are representative of the population, maybe they still reflect some historical inequality that should be maybe fixed through, for example, data augmentation techniques. If we think about the model phase, here, well, we may ask whether we can insert some constraints into how the model works to make it more fair and less discriminatory towards individuals. And then finally, if we think about actually deciding, so seeing the algorithm working with humans, does it have an effect on how humans think? Does it have an effect on how humans perceive, for example, the results of a decision that has been taken by an artificial intelligence system? So these are many different issues that should be included when designing an artificial intelligence solution, when thinking about introducing AI into a company, that all need to be accompanied by a reflection, an observation of what could be the possible fairness issues that are actually distributed along the pipeline of the AI system. So it's not something that can only be let's say, delegated to technical experts mostly, who can just choose the best measure or the best indicator that statistically says that the algorithm it's fair, but it's something that has to be an effort made by the whole organization and by different stakeholders to actually understand how throughout the whole decision-making process with artificial intelligence, we can be more fair, and especially what to be fair means in each specific decision-making context. So with this, I will close and ask whether there are any questions looking at the chat, and thank you, everyone.